singing and writing songs, and I just absorbed everything I could. And I signed with 4-Star Music out there. But actually, I'd been working in a bank, and I saw an ad in the newspaper.
It was Tuesday, the sort of southern twilight in which the sky becomes purple before succumbing to darkness. Inside a small brick home just outside Nashville, a kettle banged on the stove. Jeannie Seely, 90 years old, stood barefoot in her kitchen, the hem of her robe brushing against the tile. The world has been calmer in recent years. The phone seldom rings. The stage lights had already faded. But something stirred that night. A knock, soft but certain. She paused. At her age, guests were uncommon, and unwelcome ones were much more uncommon. She opened the door nonetheless. What was before her was neither a fan nor an old acquaintance. It was a young woman, barely 30, quivering with nervousness and holding a worn folder as if it contained gold. She did not introduce herself with a last name. She just said that she was writing a thesis, said she had questions about the Opry, about the past, about a chamber that should not exist. Jeannie's hand clenched on the doorknob. No one ever inquired about the room, not until they were present, not until they realized the cost. The girl went into the folder and retrieved a single piece of paper, a copy, typed in a format Jeannie hadn't used in decades, dated, signed, her words, her truth. One of the letters she'd written years ago, letters she never intended for anybody to find. Her breath caught, because after all these years, it was no longer simply a memory. That was proof. And that's when Jeannie realized the quiet she'd borne like a burden for 60 years was about to end. The days of smiling through tight teeth, seeming courteous under stage lights, and nodding as the past was rewritten have ended. It wasn't about legacy anymore. This was about reckoning. The door had just creaked open. Before the glitter, the stage lights, and her name being whispered backstage at the Opry with equal parts awe and uneasiness, Jeannie Seely was simply a Steel Town kid who couldn't stop singing. She grew up in Titusville, Pennsylvania, when music was something you hummed while cleaning the dishes, not something you pursued over state borders. Her father spent long days at the mill. Her mother sang hymns in the kitchen between loads of washing. Nobody in that house thought music could be more than background noise. No one except Jeannie. At the age of 16, she sent her first songs to a Nashville publishing business, typed on a borrowed typewriter, wrapped neatly, and sealed with optimism. She never heard back, but she did not stop. By 21, she'd packed a small bag, slipped the typewriter inside, and boarded a bus traveling south with only $40 in her pocket. Tennessee was not waiting for her with wide arms. She was tempted during the day, slept on sofas at night, and sang in bars with no claps. Nonetheless, she continued turning up, even when just the janitor and the bartender were listening. Then one night, in a poorly lit dive off the highway, she delivered a song that cut through the smoke-filled air like lightning. Don't Touch Me hadn't been recorded yet, but a man in the back noticed something in her voice. He gave her a card, wrote a number on the back, and walked away. It was the break she'd been looking for since she first punched the keys on the typewriter. The song would rise in the charts. Her name would be put on programs, and for a time it appeared like she had finally arrived. However, country music didn't know what to do with Jeannie Seely. She didn't fit the mold. She didn't speak softly. She wasn't polished to fit some manager's vision of marketable femininity. She wore short skirts, applied eyeliner like war paint, and laughed at her own jokes. Worse, she sang like she meant it. Not simply sadness ballads, but also songs of yearning, guilt, passion, and power. She didn't simply deliver the lyrics, she admitted them. So when she went onto the Opry stage for the first time, everyone took note, but not in the way she had hoped. A stage manager approached her and handed her a sheet of guidelines. There would be no dancing. There is no talking back. There are no skirts over the knee. Avoid displaying too much cleavage. No addressing the males until requested. She grinned, nodded, and defied all rules before the second chorus. The audience adored her. Backstage, however, the temperature dropped. She was assigned terrible time slots. She was placed with males who sneered at her introductions and stole her jokes. One announcer completely forgot her name. Another person referred to her as that little lady with the big voice, as if she were a novelty act. The male hosts whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Too bold, too loud, too much. But she did not shrink. She showed up, each time, dressed like flames, singing as thunder. They ultimately realized they couldn't ignore her anymore. She was the first woman to consistently host the Grand Ole Opry. The headlines described it as historic. The folks behind the curtain said it was a mistake. She grinned anyhow. Even then, she realized the game was not about acclaim. It was about surviving. And Jeannie Seely learned early on that if you don't play nice, you best play smart. What no one knew or asked was how much it cost her to continue standing there, microphone in hand, while the boys' club behind the curtain plotted how to make her disappear. And it wouldn't take long before they tried. All it needed was a storm, a power outage, and a folded letter containing a number. Room 6B. That's when the true story begins. The lights went out in February of 1971. A storm had roared through Nashville that night, shaking windows and making the walls crackle with electricity. Inside the Opry House, no one observed anything. The stage lights flickered, then remained steady. Backup generators kicked on, the band continued performing, and the audience applauded as if nothing had occurred. But backstage, everything changed. The passageways were dark, the air seemed dense, and amid the silent shuffle of staff and whispers of bewilderment, Jeannie Seely was delivered a message with no envelope or signature. Just a folded slip of paper with yellowed corners. Inside there is only one line, 6B, 10 minutes. It was not a dressing room number. It was not part of the public-facing layout. Jeannie had never heard of it, yet she knew the building better than the majority of the stagehands. Curious but wary, she walked the path past the typical green rooms, costume storage, and discarded prop boxes into a wing she'd never been before. There were no indicators. There are no noises, just the sound of something unseen, a low static in the air. There was only one door at the end of the hall. Plain wood, brass knob, no label, no window. There's no reason to exist, but it did. She opened the door and walked into what seemed like the wrong end of a confessional. The room was tiny. One naked light on a side table provided a subtle brightness. One metal chair. There is only one individual sitting in it. He did not stand. He did not grin. He didn't identify himself. He didn't need to. Jeannie recognized his face from afar, from the occasional board meetings or the grainy Polaroids nailed to corkboards that only the inner circle saw. He was one of the silent power brokers. No musicians, no producers, no names in the credits. They were the ones that helped shape the Opry's image from the shadows. They were in charge of deciding who appeared on stage and who disappeared. He scanned her up and down, not with passion, but with calculating, like a guy checking a machine that may be malfunctioning. Then he asked her something. Jeannie's never revealed what it was. She hinted, skirted the boundaries, and wrote metaphors in songs that no one noticed. But the words he uttered to her in that room, what he demanded, were not suggestions. They posed a menace. Her response didn't matter. Not really. Because the moment she went into that room, the message was clear. You've gone as far as we'll let you. 11 minutes later, she stepped out, eyes ahead, complexion pale and throat dry. She did not weep. She did not shout. She walked directly to the parking lot, pulled off her stage dress, a sparkling blue piece with rhinestone trim, and set fire to it. Nobody stopped her. A janitor noticed smoke curling in the distance and walked over. He stated she stayed still, watching the cloth burn as if it were a funeral. She didn't say anything. When the fire ran out of food, she stepped back inside and turned black. She never wore blue again. After that night, small changes began to occur. Her name was left off advertising posters. Her introduction was truncated. One producer switched her out midweek with a rookie who botched his lines but was still allowed back. A couple stage signals were missed. Her microphone did not turn on. The curtain did not raise until the second stanza. And every time she tried to ask a question, the answers were hidden under shrugs and courteous smiles. What about the warning from room 6B? That never vanished. She began shutting her dressing room door. She kept her handbag closed tightly. Most of all, she started typing. Not a song, not a journal entry, but records. Because she knew she was being monitored from that point forward, and she had just been informed how far they would go to make her disappear. The initial letter was written the night after room 6B. Jeannie sat in her kitchen far past midnight, the house still save for the faint click of her typewriter keys. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. Fury she couldn't express, say, or sing without repercussions. Instead, she typed. It was not a diary. Jeannie did not believe in meaningless admissions. These weren't pages of misery. They were evidence. Every letter was dated, signed. She typed on thin onion skin paper, which she had been doing since her early songwriting days. Her antique manual typewriter made such deep traces that you could feel the letters with your fingertips. And that was the point. She wanted them to last, to outlive denials, to survive memory. In those pages, Jeannie documented everything. The unspoken threats, warnings disguised as smiles, unexpected cancellations, and moments that didn't make sense until they did. The curtain that came up too late. The stage lights accidentally failed during her solo performance. Her microphone usually functioned during rehearsals but went dead on broadcast. Her introductions were routinely abbreviated, even while her male rivals faltered through lengthy statements. She jotted down names, stage managers, producers, fellow performers, not out of bitterness, but with accuracy. She was not guessing. She was documenting a pattern. Jeannie has spent her career being warned she was overly sensitive. She was reading into things, that she was inventing slights, exaggerating tiny difficulties into career-sized grudges. So she wrote it down, all of it, because she knew what they wanted more than anything was for her to start doubting her own recollection. She declined, and as the months turned into years, the letters accumulated. Some evenings, she wrote after the act, still wearing stage makeup and with her hair stiff from hairspray. Sometimes she wrote at 2 a.m. After a nightmare, I can't sleep without chronicling the past as if it were a crime scene. Because in a way, it was. A slow erasing. A death caused by 1,000 humiliations. A campaign to make her rethink her position, voice, and worth. She did not save the letters in a desk or drawer. She bought a shoebox from a corner store, packed it with lavender sachets, and covered the stack in a scarlet scarf given to her by her mother when she first left Pennsylvania. She knotted it tightly and secured it with a little metal latch. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep nosy hands away. She tucked it under her bed amid old costumes and crates of vinyl albums. She never shared the combination with anyone, not her spouse, not her close buddies, not even the ladies she occasionally confided in backstage when the lights dimmed and the liquor poured freely. Because as much as Jeannie despised what had happened to her, she dreaded what would happen if she ever tried to speak the truth. The industry has a way of making women into ghosts. First, they deleted your name, then share your tale. Then there's your face from the group shots that display in the hall. But what about that shoebox? This was her insurance policy, not for vengeance, but for proof. Years have passed. Careers increased and declined. Some of the persons whose names appeared on her letters had retired. Others perished. Some got promoted. Jeannie grinned through it all, continued to perform, keep popping up. She continued to be the courteous veteran they expected. But every time someone told her she was lucky to be here, she thought of the closed box. And she thought, no, I earned it, and I have the documents to prove it. Then, in 1991, a fire gutted her second house. The flame began in the middle of the night. Nobody was wounded. The majority of the home was saved. However, the bedroom, the chamber where the box was kept, was reduced to ashes and smoke. Only one item has survived. The shoebox, burned around the edges. The scarf has melted into fabric glue. However, the latch held. When Jeannie opened it, every letter was intact. She read them all that night, sitting on the porch in a robe and soot-stained slippers with smoke curling from the blackened doorway behind her. And when the sun rose over what remained of her home, she did not cry. She was not angry. She uttered 4 words to just the breeze. I wasn't imagining it. That was the day she stopped sending letters and began planning what to do with them. The box remained under the bed for decades. Dust collected, names faded. But Jeannie Seely would never forget what was within. She never expected anybody else to find out, not until anything goes horribly wrong. That moment occurred on a typical evening in early spring. She was in her kitchen as usual, steeping her evening tea. She'd recently turned 90, and even though she'd left the stage, her routine remained. Tea time is 7 o'clock. She seldom completed this book. By 9 o'clock, the lights go off. The calm felt familiar. She had made peace with it. Then came a knock. It was not an urgent matter. It wasn't loud. Only 3 mild taps, polite, hesitant, and almost bashful. Still, it held her in place. At her age, unexpected guests were virtually always negative. Reporters pursuing memories, distant relatives hunting inheritance, or strangers with kind looks but terrible motivations. However, something about this knock seemed different. Despite her better judgment, she opened the door. A young woman, maybe no older than 30, stood there. Auburn hair pulled back into a tense bun. A lengthy coat that was too large for her figure. And in her hands was a manila folder, clutched tight like a secret. I'm sorry to bother you, she apologized. I'm writing my thesis about women in country music, the ones that history has forgotten. Jeannie nearly closed the door right there. She did not have the energy to be courteous, but before she could respond, the girl spoke 2 words that sliced through her like a cold dagger. Room 6B. The quiet between them deepened. Jeannie clutched the doorknob more tightly. Her voice, when it eventually came, was scarcely audible. What have you just said? The girl did not blink. This is room 6B. I discovered something. I think you should see it. She opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a typed letter. Onion skin paper, slight wrinkles. A date of June 15, 1971 appears at the top. Jeannie had not read these phrases in years, yet she knew them by heart. The second visit to the room, a handshake, the condition imposed on her next performance. If I speak of this again, I will be removed from the stage before I finish my next verse. Jeannie's knees almost gave out. She allowed the girl in without saying anything else. The kettle hissed in the background. Her tea became chilly. Time is distorted around the present moment. Where did you find this? She asked. The solution emerged gradually, piece by piece. The student had been investigating floor plans for the Opry for her thesis. She had been granted exclusive access to the archive storage facility, a rear area that was not exposed to the public. While going through old stage diagrams, she came upon a big package that didn't belong. Inside, there was misfiled paperwork, stage notes, lighting cues, and the letter. "It wasn't supposed to be there," the girl explained. "Someone must have concealed it. Perhaps an employee. Maybe someone is attempting to maintain it discreetly." Jeannie gazed at the paper. Her own remarks resembled those of a stranger. She didn't recall the language being that crisp. "That's broken." "And why are you bringing this to me?" she asked. The girl did not hesitate. "Because I believe they have done this to others, and I believe they will do it again." That night, Jeannie did not sleep. She sat at her old vanity table, pulling the shoebox from beneath the bed. The lock still functioned. She loosened the remaining melting scarf and removed the lid. There they were. Dozens of letters, each one a heartbeat from a life long forgotten. She reread them, not as a victim, but as a witness. And for the first time in 60 years, she felt a change within her. Do not be afraid, not for shame. Permission, because it was no longer simply a recollection. It wasn't simply her word. Now there was proof. And a girl half her age who saw the pattern as a method rather than a coincidence or poor luck. Jeannie Seely has been advised her entire life not to stir the pot. What about the knock on her door? That was the sound of the lid coming off. The more Jeannie thought about the message, the more faces came to mind. Not simply the guys in suits sat in the gloomy recesses of the production rooms. Not only did the stagehands accidentally disconnect her microphone. No, what bothered her the most were the ladies. The ones who grinned excessively, who swallowed their rage, who faded, because it didn't only happen to her. Room 6B was more than simply a door. It represented all they did to women who refused to play the part. Dottie West had seen it, a wildfire on stage, full of laughter and sadness. However, in her latter years, the glitter faded. Jeannie remembers Dottie's late-night calls when performances were unexpectedly canceled. Her voice was filled with terror as she stated that she believed someone was observing her. Not fans, but insiders. And when her automobile crashed, everyone described it as a tragedy. Jeannie labeled it a pattern. Naomi Judd? Another loss shrouded in silence. However, Jeannie remembered how active Naomi had been at the conclusion. She was asking inquiries. "I'm researching ancient contracts." She even left a cryptic but stern message for Jeannie 1 month before her death saying, "You were correct all along. They're still doing it." And she was gone. Skeeter Davis had ventured to challenge the industry's religious stronghold, and he was barred from appearing on the Opry for over a decade. Just like that, one statement. One woman with a microphone risked speaking anything off script. Gone. And then there was Loretta. Loretta Lynn was a mountain of a lady, strong, straightforward, and unrelenting. But even she was not exempt. Jeannie remembered their final meal together. Loretta had leaned forward and stated, "They don't want us around once we stop smiling." It was not spoken in anger. It was spoken as if a lady were reading a weather report, factual, unavoidable, and an impending storm. These ladies didn't simply vanish. They were methodically erased from memory. Not everything at once, slowly. A producer would cease returning calls. A publicist would advise taking a little break. Invitations would go misplaced in the mail. Tribute acts would forget their names. Documentaries would turn them into footnotes. And someone close would invariably say they were just tired, or a little emotional, or not what the Opry audience wants anymore. Jeannie saw it happen to many women. Some were replaced with younger faces. Some were portrayed in the media as divas or troublemakers, while others just ceased appearing. When they left, no one dared to inquire why. Because the Opry did not end careers. Not in a way that can be proven. It starved them. pulling back the oxygen till voices became raspy and hands ceased knocking. It did not toss you out the front door. Instead, it silently closed it and changed the locks. Jeannie almost evaded that destiny. She played smartly rather than nicely. She never demanded the spotlight. She transformed unfavorable time slots into standing ovations. She allowed them to underestimate her until they couldn't get rid of her without being petty. Even then, she could feel the trap door beneath her feet. That's why she had saved the letters. That was why she had never believed the applause. Because the Opry was more than simply a stage. It was a machine, and if you stopped conforming to its picture, it rebuilt without you. The knock on her door had triggered more than just a recollection. It broke the delusion wide open, and Jeannie recognized that if she didn't speak up now, her own tale would be rewritten, smoothed out, simplified, and made more suitable for TV retrospectives and coffee table novels. They would label her a pioneer, a star of the theater, a lady paved the way, but they wouldn't tell her how much it cost unless she informed them and told them aloud. There was a curtain behind every standing ovation, and behind that curtain was a ledger full of names they assumed no one would remember. Jeannie did.